Imagine walking into your ex's wedding thinking you're just another guest, and then out of nowhere they call you up in front of everyone to sing. Would you run, freeze, or somehow find the courage to face the very people who once broke you? What this woman did next will leave you speechless. And trust me, you'll want to watch until the very end. She was supposed to be just another smiling guest at her ex-boyfriend's wedding, a name on the seating chart, a face in the crowd. But in less than 3 minutes, under a canopy of fairy lights and the soft hush of a vineyard evening, Claire Harrison would find herself standing alone, trembling at the microphone, her voice the only sound in a room full of people who once thought they knew her. And what happened next would leave the entire room breathless. Before we get into this story, hit subscribe so you don't miss more powerful tales of resilience, love, and unexpected triumph just like this one. Now, let's begin. It had been 6 years since Claire Harrison had sung in public. Once music had been her lifeline. Her voice, a shimmering, soulful soprano, had carried her through small-town church choirs in Oklahoma, music festivals across the Midwest, and even a full scholarship to one of the top music schools in Chicago. But life, as it often does, had other plans. At 21, a torn vocal cord during a college performance ended her dream of pursuing a professional career. Recovery was long and uncertain, her confidence shattered. Every attempt to sing felt like grasping for something that wasn't quite there anymore. Claire pivoted, she returned home, built a quiet life teaching music to kids at a local community center. In the warm chaos of small hands and beginners' piano keys, she found joy again, but not the stage, never again the stage. And then came the invitation. It arrived in a crisp ivory envelope, her name handwritten in elegant script. Ethan Cross and Emma Collins requested the honor of her presence at their wedding in Napa Valley. Ethan Cross, her first love, her last heartbreak. They'd met during undergrad. Their love story unfolded like a movie. Late-night study sessions, spontaneous road trips, evenings where she'd sing him to sleep beneath the stars. He had been her biggest fan until he wasn't. Success had changed Ethan, a tech entrepreneur with sky-high ambitions. He grew distant as his startup soared. Their final conversation echoed in her mind. Even now, Claire, your music is beautiful, but it won't get you anywhere. I need someone who can keep up. The words stung more than the injury. They broke something in her. But here she was 6 years later with her sister Olivia gently urging her to go. Closure, Claire, you've earned it. And so, dressed in soft lavender chiffon, her heart armored yet fragile, Claire arrived at the Cross Collins wedding, a sun-drenched affair at one of Napa's most prestigious vineyards. It was a scene out of a dream, rolling hills of green, long wooden tables adorned with wildflowers, guests laughing beneath strings of twinkling lights. The kind of perfect, curated moment that photographs well and remembers poorly. She spotted Ethan almost immediately, taller now leaner, with that same restless energy in his gaze. His bride Emma was stunning, poised, polished, and watching Claire just a little too closely. Claire kept her distance, seated with Olivia and her old college friend Rachel near the edge of the dance floor. They sipped wine, exchanged knowing glances, and tried to dissolve into the background, but the universe wasn't done with Claire Harrison. During dinner, the MC, a charming but somewhat smug man named Lucas, took the mic. He had known Ethan in college. They'd shared a fraternity and more than a few ego-driven moments. All right, beautiful people, Lucas grinned. Time for a little entertainment, and we have a very special guest in the house tonight. Claire's stomach tightened. Some of you may not know this, Lucas continued, eyes sparkling mischievously, but one of our guests here was once the voice of our college choir, the incomparable Claire Harrison. A collective murmur rippled through the room. Claire's face flushed hot. Olivia squeezed her hand under the table. Rachel whispered, "Ignore him, he's being a jerk." But Lucas wasn't done, and what's a wedding without a little music? He gestured grandly toward the small stage where a lone microphone stood gleaming under the lights. Claire, why don't you come up and bless us with a song? Claire's heart pounded. She shook her head, forcing a polite smile. Thank you, but I'm just here to celebrate. A few scattered chuckles, a couple of claps, but Lucas pressed on. Oh, come on, don't be shy. Ethan always said you had the voice of an angel. Claire froze. That sentence, that memory. A summer night years ago, a rooftop, Ethan pulling her close as she sang softly into his ear. I could listen to your voice forever. And now here she was, a relic of a story long ended, being paraded for amusement. Emma leaned toward Lucas, her voice carrying just enough for Claire to hear. It's fine, let her sing, it'll be entertaining. Claire's eyes met Olivia's. Her sisters were shining not with pity but fierce encouragement, and then Olivia did something unexpected. From her clutch purse, she pulled out a small folded slip of paper, a crinkled lyric sheet their late mother had once carried. Their mom had loved music, had taught them that a voice is not just sound, it's truth. Olivia unfolded the paper and held it up, eyes locked on Claire. Your voice is not his to silence. Claire swallowed hard, a war waged inside her, fear, shame, defiance, grief, then clarity. She rose slowly, smoothing her dress, her legs trembling but certain. The room seemed to tilt as she made her way toward the stage, every pair of eyes following her. Lucas beamed, handing her the mic. "Any requests?" Claire lifted her chin. "Yes," she said softly, voice steady. "I'll choose." And in that moment something shifted, not just in Claire, but in the room. A story was about to unfold that no one expected. Stay tuned, the best was yet to come. Claire Harrison had always been a girl of quiet determination. Even as a child in the small town of Bartlesville, Oklahoma, her voice had been her anchor, a constant through the changing tides of her young life. Her mother, a former bar singer with a heart full of song and a pocket full of dreams, used to say, "Claire, some voices are born to fill rooms. Yours was born to fill hearts." Those words stayed with her. From the age of 8, Claire was captivating church congregations with a voice that seemed impossibly mature for her years. Her performances weren't just notes and melody, they were windows into her soul. Music became her escape and her identity. When her parents divorced and her mother worked double shifts to keep them afloat, Claire would sit for hours by their battered upright piano, her small fingers exploring keys like they were sacred relics. She won local competitions, earned scholarships, and eventually found herself in Chicago, attending one of the top music conservatories in the country. For a while, it seemed as though the future she had dreamed of was within reach. And then came Ethan Cross. They met at a campus open mic night. Claire was performing an acoustic cover of Fleetwood Mac's Landslide when Ethan walked in with his usual air of effortless charm. He was a computer science major already interning with a Silicon Valley startup full of ambition and vision. Claire, grounded and emotionally attuned, was drawn to him instantly. Their relationship unfolded quickly, fiery, passionate, and intense. Ethan would sit front row at every performance, his eyes locked on her, mouthing every lyric. He once told her, "When you sing, it's like the whole world fades away." For Claire, that was love. But love, as she would painfully learn, isn't always enough. As Ethan's career skyrocketed, so did his ego. His startup caught the attention of major investors, and suddenly his world was filled with board meetings, private jets, and endless pursuit of the next big thing. Claire watched the man she loved drift further away, consumed by a hunger for success that seemed insatiable. When her vocal injury happened, a torn chord during a grueling recital, it should have been a moment where Ethan stood by her side. Instead, it became a wedge. He was sympathetic at first, but as her recovery dragged on and her confidence wavered, the cracks began to show. During one particularly cruel argument, Ethan said the words that would haunt Claire for years. "Claire, your music is beautiful, but it won't get you anywhere. I need someone who can keep up." It was as if he had taken the very thing that defined her and reduced it to a liability. After their breakup, Claire returned to Oklahoma, her dreams in tatters. Her mother passed away not long after, a devastating blow that left her reeling. But life has a way of offering new paths. Claire began teaching music at a local community center, finding solace in helping others discover their voices. In the laughter of children and the shaky first notes of beginners, she rebuilt her spirit piece by piece. She rarely performed in public, but in private she sang for her students, her sister Olivia, and in quiet moments when grief pressed too close. Meanwhile, Ethan continued to climb. He became a tech mogul, gracing magazine covers, speaking at conferences, dating socialites. Then came Emma Collins. Emma was everything society admired, a polished attorney from a prominent New England family, sharp-witted and impeccably poised. She met Ethan at a gala in San Francisco, and their whirlwind romance quickly became tabloid fodder. To the outside world, they were the perfect power couple. But those closest to them knew Emma's insecurities ran deep, particularly where Claire was concerned. Emma had heard stories of the angel-voiced ex who had once held Ethan's heart, and though she'd never admit it, the thought gnawed at her. When the wedding guest list was finalized, it was Emma who insisted Claire be invited under the guise of grace and inclusivity, but with a subtler motive in play. Claire's sister Olivia knew. "She wants to prove she's won," Olivia warned, but Claire chose to attend anyway, not out of pride, but to reclaim her narrative. She was no longer the heartbroken girl Ethan had left behind. As the wedding approached, Claire leaned on her closest friend, Rachel, a fellow music teacher who had been with her through every high and low. Rachel reminded her of a simple truth. "Claire, your voice is yours. No one gets to rewrite your story unless you let them." That mantra echoed in Claire's mind as she packed for Napa Valley. Her suitcase held more than dresses and shoes. It carried years of heartache, resilience, and a quiet determination to stand tall. And standing tall was what she would need to do. The wedding at the vineyard was more extravagant than Claire had imagined. The guests were a sea of designer gowns and bespoke suits. The air was thick with unspoken judgments and lingering glances. Claire kept her composure, seated beside Olivia and Rachel. But the tension was undeniable. Emma's watchful gaze, Ethan's occasional unreadable glances, Lucas's smirking charm. The stage was set not just for a celebration of love, but for a reckoning of the past. And though Claire didn't know it yet, she was about to face the very moment she had feared and longed for in equal measure. Because sometimes the voice you think you've lost is waiting for the right moment to be heard again. As the evening sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the vineyard, the mood inside the reception tent shifted from elegant formality to something more electric. Wine flowed freely and conversations grew louder. The hum of laughter masked the subtle currents of tension rippling beneath the surface. Claire Harrison could feel it pressing against her chest. She sat quietly at her table beside Olivia and Rachel, her fingers absently tracing the rim of her glass. Her voice remained unspoken, locked away behind a lifetime of unhealed wounds, but deep down something in her stirred, a soft, restless yearning she'd tried so long to ignore. Then came the catalyst that would shatter the fragile calm. Lucas, the evening's MC, took the stage once more. With his signature grin and a mischievous twinkle in his eye, he leaned into the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, drawing out the words with performative flair, "before we kick off tonight's dancing, I thought we could enjoy a special little moment." A murmur swept through the room. Guests turned their attention toward the stage. Claire's pulse quickened. Lucas continued. "You see, weddings are about stories. Old ones, new ones, the ones that bring us here tonight. And as it happens, we have a very special guest whose voice once told one of the most beautiful stories I've ever heard." Claire's breath caught. Olivia's grip tightened around her hand. Lucas smiled, eyes scanning the crowd until they landed squarely on Claire. "I'm talking about none other than Claire Harrison." A ripple of polite applause followed. Claire froze, her heart racing. Lucas pressed on, undeterred by her visible discomfort. Now, those of us who knew Claire back in college remember that her voice could stop time. And though it's been a few years, he paused for effect, we'd be honored if she'd share a song with us tonight. The applause grew louder, more insistent. Guests craned their necks, eager to see if she would rise. Claire shook her head slightly, offering a polite smile, hoping the moment would pass, but Lucas wasn't finished. "Come on, Claire," he urged, his tone teetering between charm and challenge. "It's just one song, no pressure." And then from across the room came a voice she'd both dreaded and longed to hear. Ethan. His voice was softer than she remembered, uncertain, yet laced with something else, guilt perhaps. "Claire, if you'd like to." Those words hit her like a wave. Memories surged, nights spent singing under starlit skies, whispered promises that now lay in ruins. Claire's vision blurred with unshed tears. Her throat tightened. Then another voice cut through the haze, Emma's, cool and measured, barely concealing its edge. "It's fine," she said to Lucas, her smile brittle. "Let her sing, I'm sure everyone would love it." The invitation was no longer a request, it was a test. Rachel leaned in, her voice low and urgent. "You don't owe them anything, you can say no." Claire hesitated. Every fiber of her being screamed to retreat, but then from the corner of her eye she caught a small, familiar movement. Olivia, her ever-steady anchor, was unfolding the worn piece of paper their mother had cherished, a lyric sheet faded with time. She held it up gently, her eyes shining with unspoken encouragement. In that moment Claire felt a shift within herself. A memory surfaced, her mother's voice, soft in her ear during a childhood recital. "Your voice is not for their approval, it's for your truth, let it speak." A single tear slipped down Claire's cheek. She rose slowly, her knees trembling beneath her dress. The room seemed to tilt as conversations hushed, anticipation thickening the air. Lucas grinned triumphantly, extending the microphone. "Let's give her a warm welcome." Claire took the mic, her fingers trembling. Lucas cued a playful pop backing track, expecting a light-hearted performance. Claire stopped him with a raised hand. "I'd like to choose my own song," she said, her voice quiet but resolute. Lucas blinked, caught off guard. "Of course," he replied, stepping back. Claire turned to the band. "Do you know Adele's Someone Like You?" A few nods. The pianist adjusted his sheet music. The room fell into an expectant silence. Claire's heart pounded, her gaze swept the room, Emma's smug smile faltering, Ethan's expression unreadable, Olivia's tear-filled eyes locked on hers. She closed her eyes briefly, grounding herself in the memory of her mother's words. Then the first notes began to play. Claire inhaled deeply and sang. Her voice emerged fragile at first, then fuller, richer, carrying the weight of years unspoken. Every lyric was a thread stitching her past and present into one raw tapestry. The room seemed to vanish. There were no glances, no judgments, only the truth pouring from her soul. And as she reached the chorus, her voice broke, shimmering with unfiltered emotion. Tears streamed down her face, mirrored by many in the crowd. Rachel sobbed quietly. Olivia pressed her fist to her mouth. Even Lucas looked away, shame coloring his features. Ethan's face was pale, his eyes glistening. Emma sat frozen, her confidence shattered beneath the song's brutal honesty. Claire sang not for applause or redemption, but for herself, for the girl who once believed her voice was her worth, and for the woman who had rediscovered its power. As the final note hung in the air, the room remained suspended in silence, breath held collectively, and then, like a wave breaking, the applause erupted, tears, cheers, and a standing ovation. Claire stood trembling, tears mingling with her smile. In that moment she realized a profound truth. A voice silenced by doubt can still rise stronger and truer than ever. A lesson echoed in her heart. We may not choose our moments of reckoning, but we can choose how we meet them. And as she handed the mic back, her gaze steady and clear, another chapter of her story quietly began. The moment Claire Harrison stepped toward the microphone, the air inside the tent seemed to change. A hush fell over the guests, as if everyone sensed that something unexpected was about to unfold. The casual chatter and clinking of glasses faded into an uneasy stillness. Claire's heart pounded in her chest. The polished wood of the microphone stand felt cold beneath her fingertips. She gripped it tighter, grounding herself. For a fleeting second, she wondered if she had made a mistake. But then her gaze found Olivia's, her sister, standing at the edge of the crowd, the folded lyric sheet from their mother now pressed to her heart. A silent message passed between them. You can do this. The pianist looked to Claire for confirmation. She gave a small nod. The first few chords of Someone Like You drifted into the room, delicate and haunting. Claire closed her eyes and inhaled deeply. When she opened them again, she wasn't singing for Ethan or for Emma or for the audience. She was singing for the little girl who used to belt out songs in their mother's kitchen, for the teenager who had once filled concert halls, for the young woman who had believed her voice was lost forever. Her voice emerged soft at first, each note trembling with emotion. I heard that you're settled down, that you found a girl, and you're married now. The first line hung in the air like a fragile promise. Claire poured herself into each word, her voice building with every verse. Across the room, faces shifted. Emma, once confident, now sat frozen in her seat, her expression unreadable. Ethan's gaze was fixed on Claire, his jaw clenched, hands resting nervously on his lap, but Claire sang on, her voice gaining strength with each note. Her mother's memory danced through her mind, late nights at the piano, gentle encouragement after long rehearsals, whispered reassurances during moments of doubt. Claire felt her presence now, woven into every lyric. As she reached the chorus, her voice soared, pure and unrestrained. Never mind, I'll find someone like you. Tears welled in Claire's eyes, spilling over as she sang. She made no effort to hide them. Her voice cracked with raw vulnerability, each word a release of years of heartache and healing. Around the room, guests were visibly moved. An older woman dabbed at her eyes with a napkin. A young couple exchanged glances, their hands entwining. Even Lucas, the once smug MC, stood solemnly, his earlier bravado replaced by quiet reverence. And then there was Ethan. As Claire reached the bridge of the song, their eyes met. The years between them seemed to collapse in that moment, regret, love, loss, and forgiveness mingling in a single glance. But Claire didn't falter. Her voice rang clear and strong, unburdened by the weight of their past. As the final verse approached, her gaze drifted toward the ceiling of the tent where soft string lights twinkled against the night sky. She whispered almost to herself, for Mom and for me. The words weren't part of the song, but they echoed louder than any lyric. Olivia covered her mouth, tears streaming down her face. Rachel reached for her friend's hand, both women overcome by the raw beauty of the moment. Claire sang the final chorus with quiet intensity, her voice wrapping the room in a cocoon of shared emotion. Never mind, I'll find someone like you. The last note lingered in the air, a shimmering thread of sound that refused to fade. For a long moment the room remained suspended in silence, as if no one dared to break the spell. Then, as if on cue, the audience erupted into applause. It wasn't polite or obligatory. It was thunderous, heartfelt, a standing ovation from a crowd that had been utterly transformed. Claire stood at the microphone, her chest heaving, tears still glistening on her cheeks. A smile, small but radiant, broke across her face. She had done it. She had reclaimed her voice. Among the sea of clapping hands, one figure remained seated, Ethan. His face was a portrait of conflicting emotions, sorrow, pride, perhaps even admiration. But Claire no longer sang for his approval. She stepped away from the microphone, her posture tall, her spirit unbowed. As she made her way back toward Olivia and Rachel, guests reached out to touch her arm, to whisper words of gratitude and awe. You were extraordinary. That was the most beautiful thing I've ever heard. A middle-aged man near the bar wiped his eyes. That song, that was real. Claire offered soft smiles and gentle thank yous, her heart full. And somewhere deep inside, a long-closed door creaked open. A lesson crystallized in her mind, a truth she would carry forward. Sometimes the moments meant to break us become the ones that set us free. We cannot control the stage we are given, but we can choose the voice with which we meet it. The applause slowly faded, replaced by a thick emotional hush that lingered like smoke in the air. Claire stood at the edge of the stage for a beat longer, her breath catching in her throat. She had done it, but more than that, she had survived it. Her legs still trembled as she stepped down into the sea of faces, but instead of the cold stare or polite indifference she had once feared, she was met with warmth. Guests reached out instinctively, touching her arm, offering kind smiles, their eyes glassy with tears. An elderly woman, her voice trembling, clasped Claire's hands. "That wasn't a song, dear, that was a life you just sang." Claire swallowed hard, offering a soft thank you. Words felt too small. Olivia met her halfway through the crowd and pulled her into a fierce embrace. "Mom would be so proud," she whispered into Claire's ear. Claire held her sister tightly, her shoulders shaking as the adrenaline gave way to release. Nearby, Rachel wiped at her cheeks, her smile beaming with unfiltered pride. "You were magnificent, Claire, absolutely magnificent." In the far corner of the room, Emma sat stiffly at her table, her facade cracked and uncertain. For all her earlier confidence, she seemed now like a woman grappling with something far larger than jealousy, perhaps regret, perhaps a deeper understanding of what she had tried to diminish. And Ethan, he had remained seated through the ovation, but now he stood slowly, almost hesitantly. He made his way through the crowd until he reached Claire. For a moment, they simply looked at each other. The years of love and heartbreak hung between them like an unspoken cord. Finally, Ethan spoke, his voice low and uneven. "Claire, I had no right, back then and tonight, I'm sorry." Claire's heart twisted, but there was no bitterness left in her. She had sung it all away. She met his gaze steadily. "It's not about us anymore, Ethan. It never really was. I just needed to find my voice again." He nodded, his eyes shining with unshed tears. "You found it," he whispered, "and then some." They stood for a beat longer, two souls once tangled, now quietly untwined. Just as Claire began to turn back toward Olivia and Rachel, a voice called out gently from nearby, "Miss Harrison." She turned to see a tall man in his early 50s dressed in an elegant but understated suit. His face was kind, his eyes alive with something more than curiosity. "I'm Michael Harris," he introduced himself. "I own the Blue Room, a jazz lounge in Manhattan. I was visiting Napa this weekend," he smiled softly, "and I think your performance tonight was the most honest, moving thing I've heard in years." Claire blinked, caught off guard. "Thank you," she managed, her voice almost a whisper. Michael continued, his tone warm but earnest. "I'd like to offer you a spot, a night at the Blue Room. No pressure, of course, but if you're ready, I think the world deserves to hear more of what you shared tonight." Claire's breath caught, the words hung in the air, shimmering with possibility. It wasn't fame, it wasn't redemption, it was something better, a door she hadn't even dared to imagine opening again. Olivia squeezed her hand, tears sparkling in her eyes. "Say yes, Claire," Rachel grinned, nodding enthusiastically. Claire felt the weight of the moment settle over her. A voice she thought she'd buried had carried her here, and now it was offering her a future. She turned to Michael, her smile steady and true. "I'd be honored." A small round of applause followed as the news spread quietly through the nearby guests, but Claire barely heard it. Inside, a quiet joy bloomed. Sometimes life doesn't come full circle. It spirals upward, carrying you to places you never thought you'd reach. Later that night, long after the guests had danced and the music had faded, Claire found herself alone under the stars, the vineyard bathed in moonlight. She pulled out her phone, her fingers trembling slightly, and typed a simple message to her old voice coach from college, a woman who had once believed in her more than anyone. "Guess who sang tonight?" she wrote. "Guess who's going to sing again?" The reply came almost instantly. "I always knew you would. The voice never leaves, it just waits." Claire smiled, tears spilling freely down her cheeks. She wasn't the same girl who had once lost her way. She wasn't a broken voice or a forgotten song. She was a woman who had found herself note by note, and this time the melody was entirely her own. 30 days later, Claire Harrison stood backstage at the Blue Room, a soft glow of blue light seeping through the velvet curtains ahead of her. The once distant hum of clinking glasses and gentle conversation now wrapped around her like an invitation. It was a scene she dared not imagine for years, one she'd quietly mourned as lost, but life had a way of circling back, not to the same place, but to some place entirely new. She adjusted the strap of her black satin gown, her palms warm against the familiar coolness of the microphone she held. Through the small gap in the curtain, she glimpsed the packed room, an audience of strangers and supporters alike. Among them, Olivia sat front and center, her eyes already glistening. Rachel leaned in close beside her, an encouraging smile playing at her lips. Somewhere in the crowd, she knew Michael Harris was watching too, the man who had offered her this new beginning with nothing more than an open heart and a belief in the power of an honest voice. Claire took a slow breath, grounding herself. This time there was no bitterness beneath her song, no fear of judgment. The voice she would share tonight wasn't for validation, nor was it an act of rebellion against old wounds. It was for joy. It was for the love of the craft that had carried her through every chapter of her life. It was for her mother, whose presence she could almost feel in the warmth of the stage lights. It was for the little girl inside her, who had once dared to believe that a song could change the world. Michael's voice came through the small earpiece. "Whenever you're ready, Claire," and she was. As the curtains parted and the room erupted into welcoming applause, Claire stepped forward, her gaze sweeping across the sea of faces, not searching for approval, but simply connecting soul to soul. She spoke softly into the mic. "Good evening, I'm Claire Harrison. I'd like to start tonight with a song that means a great deal to me." She nodded to the pianist and the first few chords filled the room, a song entirely her own, one she had written in the weeks following that unforgettable night at the vineyard, a song about finding strength in the spaces where others had tried to silence her. Her voice soared, not perfect, but pure, resonant with every ounce of the journey that had led her here. And as she sang, something extraordinary happened. In the crowd, faces softened. A young woman held her partner's hand tighter. An older man leaned forward, tears pooling in his eyes. A group of fellow musicians exchanged knowing glances, recognizing the depth of vulnerability woven through each note. Music, Claire realized in that moment, was never about perfection. It was about connection. It was about offering a piece of yourself and trusting that it would land in someone else's heart. As the final note faded, the room stood in a moment of reverent silence before bursting into a standing ovation. Claire smiled, her chest full, not of pride, but of peace. Later, as she stood by the bar with Olivia and Rachel, an unexpected voice spoke behind her. "I can't tell you what that meant to me." Claire turned to see a woman in her 40s, her eyes rimmed with fresh tears. "I gave up singing years ago after a terrible audition. Tonight, you reminded me why I loved it in the first place." Claire reached for the woman's hand. "Your voice is never lost. It's always there waiting. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." The woman nodded, her grip tightening gratefully. Moments like this were the true currency of her new chapter. In the days that followed, messages poured in from people who had been there that night or who had heard about the performance. A father shared that his daughter, battling stage fright, now wanted to audition for her school's choir. A retired musician thanked Claire for reminding him that music is meant to be felt, not perfected. Each story wove itself into the tapestry of her growing community, voices reconnecting with their own courage. Claire began to understand a profound lesson. Sometimes the impact of our most vulnerable moments ripples far beyond what we can see, and sometimes the very wounds we once tried to hide become the bridges that connect us to others. Her own journey had not been without scars. There had been nights of doubt, mornings when the ache of old fears threatened to close her throat before a note was sung. But through it all, one truth had remained steadfast. A voice can never be silenced if it is rooted in authenticity. One evening, while preparing for another performance at the Blue Room, Claire revisited the lyric sheet Olivia had carried at the vineyard wedding. The creased paper, now framed on her bedroom wall, reminded her of how far she had come. She thought back to her mother's words. "Your voice is not for their approval, it's for your truth," and now more than ever she understood. Our greatest strength lies not in the approval we seek, but in the truth we dare to share. In embracing that truth, Claire had found not just her voice, but her place in the world. The lesson wasn't hers alone. It was one she longed to pass on, especially to those watching her story unfold. To anyone who has ever doubted their worth, to anyone who has allowed fear or someone else's judgment to dim their light, your voice matters, your story matters. And the moment you choose to stand in that truth, even trembling, you give permission for others to do the same. So if you've been waiting for the right moment to share your voice, to chase the dream that still tugs at your heart, let this be it. Not because perfection awaits, not because applause is guaranteed, but because your truth deserves to be heard. Claire's journey is far from over. The stage she stands on now is just another beginning. And perhaps as you reflect on her story, you'll find a piece of your own courage waiting to be claimed. Because the next song, the next story, it could very well be yours. If you found Claire's journey inspiring, be sure to subscribe so you never miss more stories of resilience, redemption, and the quiet power of the human spirit. Claire Harrison's story is one that lingers long after the final note fades. It's a story of loss and resilience, of identity rediscovered through the very act of facing what once shattered it. At first glance, it may have seemed like just another uncomfortable wedding moment, a woman asked to perform in a space where her past still loomed large. But beneath the surface, this was a reckoning years in the making. Claire wasn't simply asked to sing. She was asked to confront the ghosts of heartbreak, self-doubt, and the judgment that had silenced her for far too long. When Ethan Cross broke her heart and told her that her music wouldn't get her anywhere, the damage was far deeper than words. For Claire, her voice wasn't just a skill, it was her essence. When her injury sidelined her dream and Ethan's rejection compounded that loss, she withdrew into a smaller version of herself. It happens to many of us. Life delivers a 1-2 punch, and we start to believe the worst things others say about us. We convince ourselves that maybe they're right, that we're not enough, that what we love most about ourselves isn't valuable in the real world, and so we shrink. Claire spent years teaching music, nurturing others while quietly tending to her own wounds. In many ways, it was an act of grace, giving her students the encouragement she never fully received. But deep inside, the voice that had once soared remained trapped beneath layers of fear and what-ifs. Then came the invitation. The vineyard wedding wasn't just a test of Claire's composure. It was a challenge to reclaim her voice in front of the very people and memories that had once robbed it from her. Standing there under the lights with a crowd half expecting her to falter, Claire faced the ultimate question. Would she remain bound by her past, or would she break free and sing her truth? We all know what happened next. Through tears and trembling hands, she delivered a performance that silenced the room, not out of defiance, but out of sheer authenticity. Her choice of song wasn't about proving a point to Ethan or to Emma. It was about honoring the love she once had for singing and the strength she had built in its absence. The most powerful part of Claire's journey isn't that she found her voice again. It's that she chose to share it not from a place of bitterness or vengeance, but from a place of grace. When Ethan approached her afterwards seeking forgiveness, she didn't lash out. She didn't deliver a cutting remark or bask in vindication. Instead, she said with quiet strength, "It's not about us anymore." That moment spoke volumes. It was the embodiment of a profound moral lesson. The path to healing isn't paved with retribution, but with self-acceptance and forgiveness. Claire's story reminds us that being asked to revisit our deepest wounds can feel cruel, but it can also be the catalyst for growth we never thought possible. It teaches us the power of patience and the importance of choosing when and how we reclaim our narrative. Sometimes the world will try to box you in. Sometimes people will tell you that your dreams are impractical, that your worth is conditional, that you must become something other than yourself to be loved or respected. But the truth is this: your worth is intrinsic. It exists beyond talent, beyond circumstance, beyond what others can see or understand. And your voice, whether it's literal, creative, or metaphorical, deserves to be heard. So how can we apply this to our own lives? First, be patient with yourself. Healing isn't linear. You may need time away from the spotlight to rebuild your spirit. That's not weakness, it's wisdom. Second, be wary of whose opinions you internalize. Not everyone who doubts you is worth listening to. Claire once allowed Ethan's words to define her self-worth. We've all done the same. The real work lies in learning to trust your own inner voice again. Third, lead with compassion, even toward those who have wronged you. When Claire forgave Ethan, not with words, but with the grace of her performance, she modeled a kind of emotional maturity we would all do well to emulate. Forgiveness isn't about letting others off the hook. It's about freeing yourself from the chains of resentment. Lastly, embrace opportunities when they arise, even when they terrify you. Claire could have walked away from that microphone. No one would have blamed her. But by stepping into that moment, she transformed her life and inspired others to do the same. So whatever your stage may be, whether it's a literal one, a career move, a creative pursuit, or a difficult conversation, don't let fear keep you silent. Speak your truth, share your gifts, live fully and unapologetically. And remember, it's never too late to reclaim your voice. If Claire's journey moved you, please consider subscribing to this channel. Your support helps us continue bringing powerful real-life stories like this to life. Thank you so much for watching and for being part of this growing community. Together, let's keep celebrating resilience, kindness, and the beautiful, messy, courageous business of being human.